Greetings, ni hao, konnichiwa. This is Sarah Plush from TransCelerate, Director of Operations. We're very excited to bring to you this evening or this morning, depending on where you're located throughout the world, this presentation on site qualification and training. We've had over 300 people sign up to attend today's session, and we're excited to bring to you experts from this work stream so you can learn about all the great assets this team has to offer. We'll begin sharing slides in just a moment. And while we're preparing to share slides, I'll go ahead and just introduce some folks who are on the call with me today. So as I mentioned, my name is Sarah Plush. I'm Director of Operations at TransCelerate. I also oversee a portion of our projects that look to bring value and impact to the industry. And that's why today we're here to tell you about some of the solutions that can help bring that value to your company. I'm also joined by Raquel Ricadio, who's helping to moderate this webinar, and she's a senior project manager who looks after our projects who have industry solutions that are ready for adoption. Jennifer Sun is also on the line. She's helping to manage the technical aspects. If during today's presentation you have any concerns or problems or any feedback, please feel free to email that to events@TransCelerateBiopharmaInc.com. I do want to take just a moment and make sure that people can hear us clearly. We have muted all the phone lines. So I'd ask that you please navigate to your attendees panel in the GoToMeeting series and just click the hand icon just to confirm that you're able to hear me clearly. This will let us know that you're able to hear us. And I see people are raising their hands, so that's fantastic. Just wanted to make sure before we went any farther in introducing our speakers, everyone could hear us clearly. So thank you very much. We have 4 fantastic experts on today's call. I'd like to spend a moment and introduce each one to you. Sherry Jacobson is the Director of Development Training at AbbVie. She has over 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical research industry, having held multiple roles with increasing responsibility across the industry. This includes investigative sites, clinical research organizations, and then biopharmaceutical sponsors. Sherry leads a global team responsible for the development, implementation, and tracking of compliance training in support of AbbVie's global pharmaceutical development organization. Sherry, thanks so much for being with us this evening. Next, I'd like to introduce Teresa Stewart. Teresa has more than 20-year history working in quality and is the Director and Regional Operations Manager at Allergan, where she is responsible for overseeing and monitoring of investigator study sites in the U.S. and in Canada. She's been a member of the Site Qualification and Training Team since December 2013, and Teresa led the development of the Informational Programs for sites with less experience. Teresa, thank you so much for joining us. Next, I'd like to introduce Cindy Fan. Cindy is the Training Manager and Functional Excellence at Roche in China. Cindy, thanks for being with us. And last but not least, Ada Wen. Ada has more than 6 years experience in clinical trial management. In her Affiliate Process Training Systems Advisor role at Roche, she is responsible for affiliate process management, quality risk management, training, audit and inspection support, and other related activities. Before joining Roche, she worked for Johnson & Johnson, responsible for multiple activities, including site management activities and CSDA inspections. Ada, thank you so much for joining us. And with that, I'll just briefly cover our agenda. So today on the webinar, I'll go through a couple upfront logistical pieces. We'll talk a little bit about SQT's value and impact. I'll hand it over to our experts to share more around the overview of this initiative. And then we'll dig deeper into the details, talking specifically about the GCP Mutual Recognition Program, forms, an informational program, and then we'll close out today's webinar with a discussion with our experts. So with that, I want to just let everyone know that because we've put everybody in listen-only mode, we'll be taking all of your questions through the box in your GoToWebinar panel. If you look to the right of your panel, you should see a questionnaire spot. You can click your question and then click send. We certainly will reserve some time at the end, but feel free to submit your questions, as you have them. And we'll be sure when the webinar completes to share all the materials that we share as part of the webinar. So that'll be a follow-up message that you'll receive. Also during today's webinar, we'll be doing some anonymous voluntary polling. So this is a way for our experts to learn a little bit more about the folks on the line today. This is voluntary, and it's really just a way for us to understand anonymously who really comprises the audience. So we'll certainly prompt you when we get to those questions, and feel free to participate. And then lastly, just want to touch on some of our ground rules. Really simply put, our experts are really excited to share with you their perspective, not only on what these solutions are, but also any experience they can share that might help you from a best practices perspective. Some of the things that we can't talk about, however, are specific around sites, any CROs. We really can't talk about any development plans, nor can we talk about costs or vendors. So just keep that in mind as you have your questions that you want to submit into our experts. And with that, we're going to start with our very first audience polling question. We'd like to learn a little bit more about what region you're joining us from. So if you wouldn't mind, just on the screen, you'll see a few different options to identify where you're joining us from. We'll give you a minute to select, and then after that minute's up, we'll go ahead and share those results back out. Fantastic. So we have about 90% of our audience from Asia Pacific region and about 10% from North America. Fantastic. We're now going to talk a little bit about SQT's value and impact. This is one of the first work streams in the TransCelerate portfolio. And I have to say, beyond the experts that join us today, there have been so many panels across the globe. We can advance to the next slide now. There have been so many experts around the globe that have served on multiple discussion panels because there's been such a great interest in TransCelerate's workstream. And more so, learning how to really leverage these valuable solutions. And on slide 11, it really just highlights our SQT asset page and looks to show that those materials have been accessed more than 4,000 times, and the page has been viewed by more than 10,000 visitors. So that's really fantastic and just really shows us that this interest continues, not only from a sponsor perspective, but certainly from a site perspective. So I encourage you all to make sure that if you find today's presentation interesting, certainly feel free to think about who would benefit from these tools and make sure you pass that along to them if they haven't already heard. On the next slide, we'll share just a few quotes. And these quotes are really from the TransCelerate membership. And we'll certainly let you read these to yourself, but they really highlight some value and benefit from a few different perspectives. Certainly from a cost perspective. So from a sponsor perspective, there's certainly ways in which eliminating duplicative training and really streamlining processes can really help eliminate some extra costs. But this is also something that sites can benefit as well. Because if they're eliminating that duplicative training, that means they're saving hours and hours and hours. In particular, that middle quote there is talking very specifically about one of the forms that was developed. And in particular, this form helped a certain stakeholder reduce their number of tasks to really streamline it. And overall, I think their perception is that it also improves the experience of the site as well. And then lastly, in the far right here, you'll see that one sponsor actually feels that them using the SQT solution, it makes them more attractive to investigators. So it really is helping to, I think, swing that pendulum. And sponsors are really looking at how can they be a better sponsor to work with for a site. That's fantastic. On the next slide, you'll see some quotes from sites. And TransCelerate, with this initiative, really did aim to reduce that administrative burden. And the one solution in particular that you'll hear about this evening is about the GCP recognition program. And here it's really just reflecting on the fact that that duplicative training took hours and hours, and before this program was put in place, sites were really subjected to doing the same type of training over and over and over again. So this child coordinator in particular found this very valuable, that TransCelerate and the membership put something in place. Moving on to the next slide, we just wanted to take a moment to pause and say that if you are listening to this webinar and you have something to share about your experience using an SQT tool or resource, we'd love to hear about it. Feel free to email us at events@TransCelerateBiopharmaInc.com if you want to share your experience using one of these tools. And next, we'll go into 2 more audience polling questions. We want to get a better sense of who on the call has heard about our resources before. So as I mentioned, we have a few different resources we'll be talking about tonight. We have a mutual recognition program, we have some forums, we have informational programs, or perhaps none of these things sound familiar to you. We'd love for you to just select one of these answers, and that will give us a sense of where we perhaps need to spend a bit more time or discussion. And we'll go ahead and share those results out. Wow, looks like the GCP Mutual Recognition Program, about 84% have actually heard of that. That's fantastic. About 5% have heard about the forums, and it looks like about 10% of the folks on the call this evening have not heard about any of these solutions, so we hope this call is valuable. The next poll we wanted to conduct was really around understanding just the current knowledge, and then really how is your organization utilizing these. Perhaps you're not adopting them at all. Perhaps these are things that you're currently implementing. We'd love for you just to take a moment and perhaps select the best response. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and share these results back out with the audience. All right, we'll go ahead and share those results back out with the audience now. Hey, Sarah, it's Jen. Can you not see the results? I can't, but it could be my hotel internet, so apologies. All the presenters are in different cities this evening. Oh, now it's displaying. It looks like about 26%, actually the highest percent is 29%, and it says that about 29% are currently implementing. Well, that's fantastic, and I'm sure some of the best practices our experts will share will be really helpful on that journey as you implement. Another 26% are saying that they're considering implementation, 22% are not adopting, and it looks like some are beginning to incorporate some of these into their SOPs. So that's fantastic. It sounds like some folks from the call perhaps have experience. We'd love to hear about it. And now I'm going to actually turn the presentation over to Teresa Stewart.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Sarah. I'm very happy to be the person who has an opportunity to talk to you a little bit about an overview of the Site Qualification and Training Initiative. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you very much. So as Sarah had mentioned, the Site Qualification and Training Initiative, also known as the SQT, was actually one of the first groups that was established at TransCelerate. And what makes the SQT group unique is that their focus was really on the investigators. It was an opportunity for the member companies to come together and really talk about things from a site level perspective. You know, what's causing them frustration? What's wasting their time? What are we doing that is just far too complex? And it doesn't need to be that complex. It was an opportunity for us to come together, talking about how we could streamline our training, the forms, and some of the other activities that we as sponsors and member companies of TransCelerate request of our sites in a very not common way. So in other words, it was an opportunity for us to come together and try and identify some common solutions to the activities that we execute in our clinical trials. Next slide, please. So armed with this vision, we put together our vision, our approach, and our output. As I mentioned, this work stream was one of the very first work streams. This work stream put together a number of initiatives, and we have now retired this initiative, and what we're doing is we are working on these solutions in a governance and oversight capacity. But again, if I come back to what our vision was within this work stream, we really wanted to reduce the administrative burden and duplication of effort that we as sponsor companies were requesting of our sites. We also wanted to support less experienced site staff by creating resources and information that talks a little bit about the basics of clinical research. And we're going to be presenting that later on, and I hope you all find it extremely interesting and informative, given that these topics are out there and they are readily available, and most importantly, they are free. We were also hoping that through this initiative that we would foster stronger partnerships with sites. For all of our initiatives, when we were working on them, it wasn't just about the member company perspective. We also worked with external stakeholders, including site oversight groups as well as site personnel themselves. We worked on developing processes for mutual recognition of training. Sherry's going to talk to us a little bit about GCP mutual recognition, by far one of our very most popular initiatives. Also, coincidentally, one of our very first initiatives. We also have non-protocol specific templates. And again, we have the informational programs. And as you can see, our output has resulted in GCP mutual recognition. We have 8 site forms. We have 12 informational programs. And we also have an EDC mutual recognition program. Next slide. This is actually, I think, a really interesting slide, especially in terms of when we think about adoption of the SQT initiatives. As we discussed earlier, SQT is a number of initiatives, and adoption is optional for the member companies. And what we've done here is what we presented based on some of the polls that we have taken of the member companies, just to get a sense of how many folks have adopted what initiatives into their programs and processes. And not surprisingly, GCP mutual recognition is probably one of the most popular and most adopted initiatives, followed by forms. The informational programs, I think maybe there's an opportunity for people to just become a little bit more aware in terms of the existence of these programs. And then EDC mutual recognition, one of our last initiatives. And as we have learned, a number of member companies were already actually having some form of EDC mutual recognition in place. Next slide, please. So that's our overview. What I'd like to do now is take an opportunity to pass the baton over to Sherry, and she's going to talk to us about GCP training in the mutual recognition program. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. Hi, and thanks to everyone on the line for attending today. As Teresa mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about the GCP Training Mutual Recognition Program. Again, as Teresa alluded to, this is one of the first initiatives that the Site Qualification and Training team worked on. And according to the poll, one of the ones that it seems like most of you are familiar with. But basically, this was established to reduce some of the redundant training on GCP across sites. And what we did was establish minimum criteria based on the ICH GCP guidelines for which member companies would feel comfortable that if a training program contained these minimum criteria, that we could accept that and mutually recognize that across member companies. After we established that minimum criteria, we developed a process for us to be able to do that. And part of that was an online process for training providers to attest that their training met that criteria and then have it listed on a common website so that member companies could and sponsor companies could refer to the website to see if that training has met that criteria. What we didn't do, and what we purposely chose not to do, was to develop a GCP training course. There's multiple courses out there, and we didn't want to pollute those waters. We really wanted to be able to have a process to recognize what was already in place. Obviously, by not having sites repeat GCP training for every study that they conduct, it saves a lot of time, not only for the sites, but for the sponsor companies in their ability to conduct that training. We also established a process and agreed upon a training interval that you would not need to retake that GCP training for every study, but that once a site took that training, it would be good for 3 years from the start of the study. So if the site took the training, it would be good for 3 years, and then once they got to that 3-year point, they would then have to take the training. And again, any training provider can self-attest to have their training mutually recognized on the TransCelerate website. Next slide, please. And today we have over 300 training providers represented on the site with over 800 GCP training courses that have been self-attested, representing over 30 countries. Again, this is designed to improve the relationship of sites and sponsors in reducing some of the redundancies across the industry. And important that with the recent update to ICH GCP, the minimum criteria has been updated to reflect those changes in the addendum. Next slide, please. So if I am a company or a training provider, how do I attest that my GCP training meets the minimum criteria? What you would do is go to the TransCelerate website listed there. You would select the GCP Mutual Recognition tab that appears in the upper right corner. You would review the expectations and the minimum criteria. And once you are ready, you could add the course detail by following the prompts that are on the self-attestation form. At the end of that process, you will be asked to upload a PDF sample of your training completion certificate, ensuring that it meets the criteria established. Once that is submitted, it will be reviewed by TransCelerate, and then subsequent to that review, it will appear on the website under Training Providers. It's important that as new course versions are created or as courses are updated, that you reattest that that new version continues to meet the minimum criteria. On the flip side, let's say you're a CRA and you're at a site and you're presented with a training certificate and you want to ensure that that course has been, that course meets the minimum criteria. So in our example here, we have Peter Parker at the site, and he has a certificate from Academic Advance. So how do I, as a CRA, ensure that that certificate represents training that has met the minimum criteria? Next slide. what you would do as a CRA is go to the TransCelerate site. You would click on the GCP Mutual Recognition tab on the upper right. You would select training providers and navigate to the company reflected on the certificate, and in this case, Academic Advanced. You would select the sample certificate that is listed on the website to ensure that that sample certificate matches the certificate that the site has. And if they do, then you can mutually recognize and accept that GCP training and not have to provide additional training. So again, the GCP mutual recognition process is designed to reduce some of those redundancies in training across sponsor companies. And one of the other initiatives that the Site Qualification and Training work stream established were standardized forms for investigative sites. So again, it's across several member companies or sponsor companies, we ask for a lot of the same information that we are required to collect, either from a site profile perspective or even from a, for example, a CV perspective. And so we recognize that we're collecting a lot of the same information, but we are asking for it in several different formats. And so we collectively decided how could we collect the best practices from each of the member companies and come up with some standard forms and templates and guidances that we could use across all the member companies. These documents were created and are available again on the TransCelerate website, available for use by the public. And in addition, these forms have aligned with the TransCelerate shared investigator platform so that you can either upload the forms to the platform or by establishing your profile in the platform, generate these forms. And again, the intent of this is to ensure that we are reducing any redundancies across the information that we collect, establishing a consistent terminology and approach, and saving time by eliminating duplicate information. Next slide, please. So here's a list of the forms and guidances that are available on the TransCelerate website for downloading. Again, as we have established these forms, we did collaborate with the Society for Clinical Research Sites, so it was posted on their website as well, and the TransCelerate website will point to that. Several of these forms have been translated into Japanese. And next, we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of these forms specifically and dig a little deeper into the facility profile form and the CV template. Next slide, please. So one of the forms is a CV template. Obviously, sponsor companies have to collect a CV as evidence of training and qualifications of site personnel. It is a regulatory requirement. But what was happening is that across member companies, we were asking for this information in several different formats. So we, as mentioned, came together to collect the common information that's needed to meet this regulatory obligation. And so on the TransCelerate website, we have the CV template that can be downloaded and completed. And then if you are participating in the shared investigator platform, you can either upload that CV as part of the platform or as part of creating your user profile within the platform. All of the fields that are required for the CV template, which are listed at the bottom of the slide, are completed as part of that user profile. And so those fields will be collated within the platform, and you can then preview what a system-generated CV within the platform to ensure that it's accurate, and then generate that CV within the platform. And then, if needed, you can download that CV for a member company. In addition, there's a similar approach with the facility profile form. This form basically collects general information about a site, and you can either access the form via the TransCelerate website and complete it and then subsequently upload it, or you can complete your profile within the shared investigator platform, and then once you receive an invitation to participate in the study, you can review your profile and make sure that what you have established matches what the requirements are for that study, and either attach different facilities if you have other ancillary facilities needed for that study, and then also assign site personnel for that study so that your profile is specific for that study. And again, this reduces the number of site feasibility forms that have to be completed if all of this can be completed as part of your facility profile form. And with that, I'll turn it over to Cindy to talk a little bit about the informational program.
Thank you, Cheryl. Next, I would like to introduce a little bit about the informational program that's in the SQT website. So, as you know that based on the ICH principles, that this is document, but with the industrial's idea that how to implement these rules documents into practical use. So that with that idea that SQT that provided this web-based informational program with very interactive role plays and really scenario-based e-learning e-learning program in the website. So take this example that's like a PI oversight. With the oversight, it just provided the resources for the less experienced principal investigators that understand what is the main idea of the clinical trials and what's their role and responsibility in the clinical trial. And also with this e-learning course that is not developed just only by one company, just across the industry with each company's pharma company's input, would provide this best practice and for all the industry use. And you may know that China now has more and more involved in the global clinical trial investigation. The question, the barrier is about the language. How can we introduce this such a great informational program to the Chinese investigator and Chinese pharmaceutical industry staff? So we just also implemented the Mandarin course to the industrial. So all these informational programs like PI oversight and the other program that I will introduce later, that's all translated in Mandarin. So that's provide great benefits to the patient safety, quality of clinical trial oversight, and also that can give more effective, efficient way for the startup and conduct for all the site. Next slide, please. Yeah, as mentioned before that, all this course is based on the ICH GCP principles, but it's not just read and understood document. We provide a web-based interactive role play. So for example, if we have this course, clinical research overview, we will have different roles. So what is the staff person may have on the clinical research, and what the sponsor role will provide the information to the site person. So this is all we just have took a lot of time to do the need analysis, to align with all the companies in the industry and provide a storyboard, and that's put it in the interactive way for our users to better understand what is inside of it. So just really to help us to enhance the understanding of the clinical trial and also to improve the overall compliance with field protocol deviation. Next slide, please. So besides this, the PI oversight, we also have another 11 courses that we have implemented with role play, and each course it's about 20 to 40 minutes. It's no more than 40 minutes to have the site and the sponsor users to have completed in their convenient time. It's not a very long course, and it's very basic and information about the concept of clinical research. So it cannot be replaced the GCP training, but it is based on this GCP training. And all these courses are based on
Cindy, I'm just going to interrupt you for
Yes?
just a moment. The audience is having some trouble hearing you, so we're not sure if you can speak a little bit closer to the microphone. They're giving us some feedback there. It's difficult to hear you.
Okay. Is that better now?
I believe so. Yes, it's better. The audience is confirming it's much better now.
So I'm very close to the microphone now?
Yes, it's much
okay,
better.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. So as mentioned that this is based on the ICH edition 6, but we will continue to update it based on the new release, based on the ICH edition. So from the screen, you can find all these training courses are very practical, and also it's very good resource for the site user to start up and conduct clinical research. And also I want to mention a little bit about the Mandarin part because as we are in the Asia Pac, and you know that China is a big market for the clinical trial as well, so that a lot of staff that they want to have the Mandarin course. But in the background, we also took a lot of efforts to interpret it in the Mandarin. We also get the linguist review for the course, and also we have affiliate training advisor like ADA's team to have a clinical part review on this course, so that it is used a more farmer industrial language to interpret this information into Mandarin. So that I really hope that the audience for today's seminar that could have a look on this website, and you will find these resources much valuable for the site, and as well as for the sponsor part. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Cindy and Teresa.
That's all from my side.
Yes, we are going to move into our expert discussion panel section of the webinar. And if we could move to the next slide, I believe we have some questions that were submitted by our registrants prior to the webinar. We can move on to the next slide, please. Great. The first question that was submitted by our audience previously was to ask our expert panel to talk about some of your experiences implementing the SQT solutions at the sponsor level. And I would love if one of you could open up and start talking about that. I know our audience is very excited to hear about your experiences at your own organizations.
So this is Teresa. I'm happy to kick us off with this very first question. And I think when it comes to implementing the SQT solutions, there obviously are a number of SQT solutions. At our organization, I think that we were very much provided with feedback from our investigators that they really wanted us to make sure that we were implementing GCP mutual recognition. And really for us, that really resulted in us focusing in on our processes around GCP training and identifying and developing a process for that internally. It required a lot of partnerships with different factions of our organization and coming together, talking, communicating, and finding the best way to modify our processes, because for each of these solutions, introducing them, it does take time, it does take some effort, and it also takes some awareness in terms of understanding how you're going to be able to manage, maintain, and track it for later on. I think one of the other very popular items that we looked at was the site signature and delegation of responsibilities log. Again, another solution that we thought would be easy to implement, and not only that, it's used for all of our studies, so we would have a lot of value in being consistent in the use of that form. And quite honestly, as more member companies have adopted that form, we're also finding that the site knowledge base, in terms of the completion of the form, is actually resulting in reduced errors and a better quality product. Some of the other initiatives we have not completely implemented, but we have accepted them in sort of a voluntary fashion, much as the CV template. In that particular instance, if we receive that CV using the TransCelerate form, we will most certainly accept it. I hope that helps. Sherry, did you want to maybe talk a little bit about implementation?
Sure, thanks, Teresa. And a lot similar experiences as you mentioned. It really is important to ensure that you're looking at the deliverables or the outputs from SQT and seeing how you can incorporate it into your own processes. So it's not something that you can just say, oh, okay, tomorrow we're going to adopt this SQT deliverable. You really have to look at how it interacts with your internal standard operating procedures and how your internal processes, and making sure, I think communication is a big piece, ensuring that, for example, with the GCP feature recognition, making sure all CRAs are familiar with the process and can execute and answer questions, right? Because the sites sometimes have questions about some of these deliverables.
Thanks, Sherry. And Cindy or Ada, do you have any feedback you'd like to give us about your own experiences with SQT, whether that be any of the solutions, including the informational programs?
Yes, this is Cindy. As I mentioned before that, this SQT program, I'm also involved a little bit in this program in the Mandarin part. So at the background, we really took a lot of efforts to have the e-learning program being released to all the users. We took a detailed review on the linguistic part for the Mandarin, and also took the farmer language in the Mandarin. And also we had to do the audio model selection that make sure that this Mandarin character voice are really corresponded to the role in the e-learning course. So, for example, PI's voice is maybe a little low and bored, something like that. So we just make sure that this interactive programs that will be valuable resources for the other site users. Thank you.
Thank you. We did have a question come in, and this is for anyone.
This is Ada.
Hi, Ada. Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Based on the Cindy information, yes, will provide training and materials
Hey, Ada, if you could possibly speak up or a little bit closer to your microphone, we're having trouble hearing you. I think we may have lost her, unfortunately. Hopefully she'll be able to come back. I did want to bring up a question for the rest of you. I'm hoping you can still hear me, the expert panel.
We can.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Noted and recognized. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah. We celebrate and recognize the SQT programs, and the SQT work has been incorporated into our daily business and process. As a big effort of SQT, we believe the will help us across the global. Thank you.
Thank you, Ada. Sorry about everyone about some of the audio problems. We should come back online. There is a question that came in from the audience live here that I wanted to pose for the experts here. The question is, given the time commitment of the informational programs, do you tend to use them as a supplementary support when sites are struggling with a particular concept for retraining?
So this is Teresa. I'd love to take that question if you don't mind.
Of course.
I think it's a great question, and thank you very much for that. One of our goals within the informational programs when we developed them, and one of the things that we talked about, was the fact that sometimes training on clinical trials and GCP can take people hours and days to actually fully complete. And one of our goals was to make the training available and to make the training easy to take. As a result of that, we set up our topics, identified them by key topics within GCP. As you saw, we did adverse events, we did clinical practice versus clinical oversight, which is designed to explain to people the difference between those two, because there are some very important differences. We were hoping that by making them unique, separate, distinct, and keep the runtime at about 30 to 40 minutes, that people could pick and choose the topics that they were interested in. And we felt, too, by making it easy and by making it informative, that perhaps we would also motivate people to start taking additional topics and listening to additional topics just out of interest, even if they weren't specifically key to the tasks that they were responsible for in conducting the trial. As a result of that, each of these topics is actually set up very similar in structure and format so that they feel consistent and they feel that they flow very much the same. In terms of actual use of these informational programs, there's multiple ways in order to integrate these into your activities. One of the items has been, again, targeted to people who are wanting to learn more about clinical research, and in our observations of their performance on a clinical trial, have an opportunity to probably get a little bit more training. So they're available as training programs in response to deficiencies during trial execution. They're also available for site staff to use to learn about clinical trials before they start initiating the activities. And we also felt that it could be used by different people in different roles working on the studies. Sherry, do you have anything to add to that?
No, not really. I mean, I think you covered it really well. I think the key point is that it's not like GCP, which is mandatory, right? Regulatory required, you have to take GCP training, but more as a supplement, right? For you have varied sites with varying levels of experience, and so it's really designed to help those sites that may need some extra training in various areas.
And they're free.
Exactly.
Great, thanks for that. have a few more questions coming in. I'm just reading them as they come in since, of course, towards the end, we get some more questions coming fast and furious here. One was a question about, do you have a sense of which roles are doing the information programs, whether it's nurses and coordinators and less the PIs, or whether they're targeted towards one group or another?
What I am hearing from the investigator sites who are actively using these informational programs is that they are really using these for new staff who are joining their current clinical research team, whether that is study coordinators or nurses. It may also include sub-investigators. I'm not very sure many of the investigators at these sites are referencing these modules, but I will say that I have had questions come up from some of my partners in the organization asking me if we have any information that would be of interest to a physician who may wish to become involved in clinical trials. And I always share these topics with them and this area, focusing on them to talk about PI oversight, to focus in on that module, to also clinical research versus clinical overview and clinical research, because I think those are great topics for a physician who is interested in being an investigator to start with. So I guess to answer the question the long way, it really depends.
But I would just reinforce that, yes, exactly what you said.
Thanks, Sherry, and thanks, Teresa. Cindy and Ada, do you have anything to add to that question? Okay, great. There was a question that came. Great, thank you. There was a question that came up earlier in the presentation, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to word this so that the panel can understand, is asking about training that had originally met R1 requirements of ICH E6 versus training that meets R2 guidelines, just because there's some lag in when, for example, a coordinator would have taken an older training and then 3 years hasn't yet passed, and now there's R2 guidelines. Someone was just asking from the audience some sort of best practices from your experiences regarding old training versus new training, and kind of best practices and how you handle that with sites. Is that question clear?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I understand the question. Sherry, do you want to kick that off, or do you want me to start?
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, and that's definitely been a challenge with the R2 addendum. There's a couple of components, right? So you have sites that are active in a clinical study that have already taken their originally GCP training, and then the addendum comes out, and I think a lot of the member companies just did some interim training with those ongoing sites to cover that, the differences between R1 and R2. But I think moving forward, now that the expectation is that sites do need to be trained on R2, it's important that when you're looking at the GCP training, that you're ensuring that that site has been trained in ICH GCP R2, right? Whether that be a training that's on the differences between the two, if they already have existing training that is within that 3-year time frame from R1, it is a sponsor responsibility to ensure that they are trained on R2. But if it's a site that is due for, GCP training, then to train them on the whole gamut, right? R1, everything that's incorporated into R2. But it is a challenge kind of balancing who's been trained on what and at what time, right? So, and I think we're going to experience that for a little while now until everyone has adopted, until we get to a point where everyone is trained on R2. And Teresa, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I would probably share that I think one of the things is that we probably were maybe a year and a half into our mutual recognition of GCP program, and then all of a sudden there's R2. And I will say that it's a very difficult message to tell an investigator that I'm not going to accept your R1 training, and here you have to do the complete R2. So within our organization, and I think many organizations took this as an opportunity to maybe find an interim solution until the R2 training was fully adopted. And I will say, when you look at the GCP training attestation on the TransCelerate website, you're going to see an awful lot of training providers and member companies have self-attested their R2 training. So it's happening, and it's really just a matter of time where I think we'll be able to move into the scenario of only accepting R2 training without having an intermediate solution. But we felt as a member company working with investigators that we needed to find our own interim solution around that. And it's very similar to what Sherry explained.
Thank you for that. I'm going to leave the question box open for a couple more minutes to see if anything else comes in. We've been answering questions along the way with the chat box and posing questions for you as well. So thank you to everyone for providing some really great questions for our expert panel. I don't see any more questions coming in. So if you have a chance to look at your screen, we're going to put up one more poll question for you. If you could please join us in providing your feedback on that regarding how much value this webinar provided you today. Great, I think we can go ahead and close and see what our results show us. Great, it looks that the most of you saw that there was a lot of value to moderate value for this webinar, so that's great. I'm glad that we were able to provide you with information on the initiative itself and go a little bit deeper into the different tools and resources that are available to you via TransCelerate's website. I do want to spend some time at the end of this webinar to thank our expert panel and presenters, and particularly Sherry, Teresa, Cindy, and Ada. Thank you so much for joining us. And also a big thank you as well to our audience that attended the webinar today. If you would like some more information, you can always go to TransCelerateBiopharmaInc.com and also follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Those are the best places to find out the most current information on TransCelerate, as well as the Site Qualification and Training Initiative. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us on this webinar. And thank you again to our presenters and panelists. We hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.